Hello. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Jarrod, and I am the head of brand strategy at Kantar Millward Brown. And what Kantar Millward Brown is, because I realize no one has any idea who we are, is we're actually a research consultancy that helps people manage brands, right? And make those brands great and grow them. And a huge part of that, and probably what makes me a little bit different from most of the speakers, is what I'm going to talk to you about is consumers. I'm going to talk about where consumers are now and where they're going in the future, and what that means for us as people who essentially provide product for people that buy those products. And I realize I'm the last thing between you and lunch, and I will promise there are absolutely no photographs of me in this deck whatsoever, clothed or photoshopped in any way. So what I'm going to take you through is essentially the three areas where we see big changes in the way that consumers are changing their food behavior. Yeah? So first I'm going to talk about how we make food decisions as people. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's actually guiding people's protein decisions, particularly in Australia, how that's changing and what that means. Then I'm going to talk about how we buy food, because that's on the verge of changing now. And people are rapidly going to change the way that they buy, and we'll talk about that. And then how we actually prepare it, which is something that people often forget, is how we actually take that food and make it into something that we're going to eat, make it into meals at the end of the day. So those are the three areas, and I'm going to start with how we make food decisions. So no major surprises here, but Australians love red meat. Yes, this is inherently true. 87% of Australian households have bought beef in the last month. Australia has one of the highest per capita beef consumption levels in the world. Massive, right? But we know that there's challenges here. Every year we see an increasing proportion of poultry and pork, particularly taking away share from red meat, yes? And when I look at how consumers make decisions, we measure something called predisposition for MLA, which is what is it that people want to buy absent of any sort of market factor like price. If they just bought whatever is in their heads, actually in 2016, the number one protein that people would just buy, what they are predisposed to, what they love, what meets their needs as consumers, is chicken. So chicken and beef make up about 70% of the landscape, but that chicken score is increasing every year. So that's really the major competitor that we see in an Australian environment. And I'll talk you through why it is that chicken is that major competitor, but I don't think people will be too surprised by some of what I'm going to show you. When we look at why people buy particular proteins in Australia, and this will probably be true in most parts of around the world, about 50% of what makes them choose the protein they choose is something called easy everyday, a factor called easy everyday, right? It's cheap, it's easy to use, I know how to cook it, it's versatile, and it's healthy enough, right? 50% makes up that choice, right? And that forms part of a larger meta trend that we see within Australia over the last couple of years. And this is a graph of price sensitivity. You'll see that that graph decreases up until about 2013, and then there's a massive increase in 2014 and 2015 in the number of Australian consumers who make price-sensitive decisions. So rather than choosing the thing that I like, I choose the thing that is cheapest. And that explains a huge portion of chicken's popularity in the Australian market, because people are trying to buy something that fits into their budget, that they understand, that's easy. And we see this reflected across other industries as well. So anyone that watches the retail space will know that Woolies are a relatively unhappy bunch of people, because if I look over the last 5 years, people choosing Woolies stayed completely flat, and they've actually lost share over that time, while Coles, who are traditionally cheaper anyway and have decreased their prices, have gained 6%, and Aldi have gained 4%. So what happens when people become increasingly price sensitive is that it opens up markets that traditionally people would just buy what they like to increasing amounts of price sensitive buying and people switching out. If you're Woolies, that's a dangerous picture. And if you're beef, you have the same problem with chicken, right? Because what is the cheapest protein in Australia, perception-wise? Chicken, yes? And it's getting cheaper. So over the last year, people's perception is that chicken has gotten 5% cheaper and pork has gotten 4%, beef has gotten 4% more expensive. So in that environment where 50% of why I choose is price related, that's a serious challenge, right? Price, convenience, and ease. And that's part of the equation of why it is that we're seeing this pattern towards poultry and away from beef. But that's not the only reason. So I can explain another 34% based on two other factors. One is fairly easy, limitation. I am trying to eat less of this thing. The other is something called goodness. And goodness is quite multifaceted. So it has lots of vitamins and minerals and nutrients. It's good for me. It is Australian made. It is natural. Those are goodness factors. No surprises. What does well on goodness? Beef. Beef scores exceptionally well on goodness. It's the secondary driver in the category, but struggles with limitation. Yes? Everybody knows somebody who's eating less red meat. I assume even in this crowd, there are people that are going, yeah, I'm eating less beef every year because there's an idea that this is unhealthy and bad for me. So those two make up 34%. And this is where you start to get into a really interesting space because price is just price. What chicken costs is what chicken costs, right? But when we look at how people decide what is good and what is healthy, that has shifted substantially. So if we look at young people, millennials and below, most of their food knowledge comes from the internet. And most of that from social media. That means that people are just taking in this massive flow of largely uncurated information from the internet that tells them what they should eat, what's good for them, what's bad for them, what's badly made, what's well made. And actually, not all of that information is true. You can see some of this. Does anyone watch tasty videos on Facebook? Everyone's on Facebook, I assume now. The tasty videos, those little 30 seconds, how to make a recipe. That's the 5th most watched video producer on Facebook, which makes it one of the biggest video producers in the world. 1.2 billion views of that last year. That's massive amounts of information that people are just taking in all the time, right? And what this uncurated flow of information creates is a system where people are getting more and more and more knowledge, and you start to see this explosion of what we would call fads or trends within food. So it doesn't matter whether I'm talking about transparency. I want to know where it comes from, what farm, where it was processed, how it was processed. Is it about health? Is it grass-fed? Traceability, functionality, sustainability, organic, free-range, grass-fed, all of these things are essentially a reflection of having an increased amount of information at my fingertips and an increased need for control. Now, I only have half an hour, so I could have shown you a whole bunch of examples. You can look at free-range eggs at the moment. There's a choice app, so you can check if your eggs are free-range. Smart lunch boxes. Sounds like a weird idea, but smart modular lunch boxes so that you can control how much food you're eating at lunch and have a fancy lunchbox. But essentially, this is all really a reflection of control, and we see this more and more and more. And this is where we are now, yeah? And the internet allows for these very niche subgroups to exist and be propagated because it gives them a social structure within which to operate and gives a lot of information. So does anybody know a low-fat, high-carb, raw food vegan? Anybody? Anybody willing to admit that at the Northern Territory Cattlemen Association? Yeah? These are groups that exist. I'm not even making them up. They have their own celebrities. The major one for that group lives in Adelaide, so you shouldn't hold that against them too much. But essentially, the internet facilitates the existence of those sorts of groups, right? Because they give you people that think the way that you think, that tell you how to eat, what to eat, etc. That's where we are now. What we're going to see is actually that's going to change in the future. And probably the first sign of that, or the most interesting sign of that, is IBM Chef Watson. I don't know if you've seen this. Everyone familiar with Watson's, the IBM machine learning system, right? It went and won Jeopardy, and it takes unstructured information, and it can learn like a human being. So what Watson does, they put in a whole bunch of food information. And you go to Watson, and you say, oh, I want to eat beef, yeah? Which is what I did the other day. And it said, well, what will taste good with beef is shallots, chili, and chives. And you know, that's fairly sensible. Yeah, it seems like a good idea. And you go and you make that recipe. But Watson will put together whatever has synergy. It doesn't care. It doesn't care about oddity of that mixture. It cares what you want, what you're avoiding, and what goes well together. And that has some big implications, which I'll talk through in a sec. So it might sound weird. This combination sounds great. But what about when Watson says, oh, well, you should try hoof and honey ale, which is veal stock, IPA, egg whites, peaches, a slice of beef, and some wine. People made that, and it was delicious, right? And they made that because a computer told them to make that. Anybody here got Google Assistant or Siri or any of those things? the amount of information that we get from these automated systems that tell us something is incredible. And the amount of information that we get from social media telling us that we should do things is amazing. And all of those have an impact on what it is that we're doing. More and more, though, you're going to see systems like this suggest and tell you what you should be eating. And it sounds a little bit strange, but people have made the strangest recipes that Watson makes and eaten them. And I can guarantee you now, if Kim Kardashian ate something weird, people would be eating that now. Because if she put it on Instagram, people would be keen as mustard to try that for breakfast, right? And the implication for us is that the competitive set will change. So while I'm talking about chicken and I'm talking about all of these other current proteins now and the price challenges and what that actually means for us, the future is going to look very different. So synthetic protein, insects, algae, new forms of protein production that people are going to have to choose between are going to become more and more the norm as automated systems choose and tell people to eat that. Sounds crazy, realize it sounds a little bit out there, but if you Google the best way to cook insects and crickets, you will find 471,000 articles telling you the best way to cook crickets. One of them from the Huffington Post, of all places, which is, what are the top 12 ways to cook crickets? And I tried crickets, actually. They're okay. Wouldn't replace steak with a cricket, but you can. There it is. You can go and buy it right now. Australian manufacturers growing crickets all over the place for people that are that way inclined. And it sounds like a weird thing, but imagine that you wake up in the morning and all of your celebrity people that you follow are saying, hey, you should try crickets. And then your smartphone, which we'll get to in a second, is saying, oh, you should try crickets and, I don't know, mandarin porridge. There's a good chance that people will try that, and it breaks down the barriers to that. It means that we as beef need to enter into a space where we are competing with new proteins that actually, frankly, we don't fully understand at this point in time. Yeah? We don't know what the impact of all of these will be. Which brings me to my next point, which is how we actually buy our food. So, no surprises now, but most of the shopping in Australia is done at supermarkets right now. Most people buy all of their groceries and the vast, vast majority of the meat at supermarkets. Why? Because we don't trust that what we'll get will be the right quality. We intrinsically feel that we have an ability to choose food that is better than somebody choosing our food for us. Two, we're not sure that it'll be fresh or the right quality, all of these things. So only about 1% of Australians buy their meat online. About 18% of people will buy their groceries online. Yeah, round about there. But that's going to change. The US, about 5% of the population routinely buy their meat online. Some places in China, that's 20%. Right? So everyone's aware Amazon's launching their fresh food offering pretty soon here. That's also going to add a bit of a challenge to this market, and it just becomes more and more people buying online. And what we see is that packaging and home sensors are going to take all of the risk out of this sort of decision. So there's a whole bunch and raft of new tech that's going to tell you when the food arrives, is it right? Is it what you ordered? Does it have no pesticides or no hormones, whatever it is you care about? And is it fresh? Yeah. That's going to make it a lot easier for you to order online because you don't have to worry. You'll know when it arrives whether it is right. But the system is evolving very, very quickly. So what you're seeing is companies like Amazon, who of course make their money by doing all of this online and removing the friction from these systems, is they are moving more and more and more towards removing all of the friction. So what friction is the pure difficulty of going out and buying something, right? So you have to go into the website, add it to the cart, get a delivery time, such a pain in the butt. So what Amazon is doing with Alexa in Echo and their Dash system is they're letting you do this by voice, and importantly for our purposes, they're letting you do this with dash buttons and pre-selected choices. So what that means is I push a button and I order from Amazon the brand that I always buy. Or I open my pantry and I say, Alexa, will you buy me beef? And it'll buy the brand or type of beef that I always buy. Yeah? If I just say, order me meat, it'll order the type of meat that I like. So we remove the friction, we make it easier for me to do, and that actually means that what we do is we remove the amount of choice and the amount of effort that people have to put in to ordering their food. Yeah? And even that is going to change rapidly. So there, I still have to do something. Yes, I have to actually talk to something, I have to push a button. But we're seeing this evolution in the Internet of Things, and it starts with smart fridges. So LG and Samsung already make these fridges where it'll monitor what's in your fridge, and you can order from the door. So you just go, oh, I need milk, and it'll order you more milk, and then milk will magically arrive. And that's great, and that sounds like a really, really good thing. Well, what about when the system removes me completely? It knows the milk that I like, knows when I'm out of milk, it just orders me more milk, right? Sounds fine, completely frictionless from an ordering perspective. And the step that goes beyond that is when you start integrating other things. So the first of those, smart toilets. Sounds weird, right? These already exist, and what they do is they monitor health markers in your urine. And they send that information to your doctor or relative government health bodies and say, Joe Blogs, Jarrod Payne has had way too much salt this week, and that's not good, and we see kidney damage in the future. Yeah? You take that and you connect it one step further with systems like that cell phone system, also exists already. That's a prototype, where either through an implant in your skin or in your bloodstream or through urine analysis, it'll give you additional health markers and it'll monitor things like blood glucose, blood pressure, overall caloric density. And what will happen is that this system will become increasingly integrated. So not only will your fridge order your food, it'll talk to your toilet and it'll talk to your phone and it'll find out what sort of food you should be ordering. So it'll say, actually, he's been a little naughty this week. He's had way too much alcohol. We're going to cut the amount of alcohol that he gets. We're going to cut his salt. We're going to cut his fat. We're going to cut his sugar. Because why not? Yeah, the system's going to do that for me. It also means that once I've set my preferences, I don't have to bother going and reordering anything because the system does it. The system takes care of that. I don't have to stress. I don't have to order. It's completely, completely frictionless. And it becomes a system that actually is less open to brand intervention. It's a system that is less open to advertising. And it is far more open to health bodies and governments being able to dictate how it is that people consume in very subtle ways. So you get this move from where we are now, conscious consumers, right? You've heard the term conscious consumers. I only want to eat this type of beef. I only want to eat that type of grain. To passive conscious consumers. I still want to eat that way, right? I still want to be ethical, grass-fed, low-carb, high-fat, whatever it is. I just don't want to put in any effort to doing it. I expect my technology to put the effort in for me. We become these passive conscious consumers, reordering the same thing over and over again with no effort and no input from me. And that's a big challenge. That sort of system becomes far more close to us and far more close to our intervention. And your smartphone will be at the absolute seat of that. So 87% of Australians already own or use a smartphone. The number of people that wake up and look at their phone and go to bed, and the last thing they see is their phone is massive. I reckon more so than their partners in Australia and around the world. So your smartphone is going to be the hub for that, and it's going to integrate all of that for you, and systems like Alexa and Bixby and all of these new things are going to do that and going to control that. And that's really the space that you've got to get to, is this personal computer that is in my pocket all the time, how do you influence that? Yeah? How do you influence that aspect of my life? And that becomes a bit of a problem, actually, because what we find is that people don't like it when you advertise on their smartphones. Yeah? People don't like to be interrupted by smartphone advertising. They'd much rather you send them a TV ad or even a tablet. Smartphone is the lowest receptivity of any of the screens that we measure for advertising receptivity. Not sure that it will remain the lowest receptivity when you add in toilets and smartphones, because I think you'd probably be less receptive to toilet advertising. But I'm guessing that that's the case in most cases. So it means that people are moving into a system where we have less control and less space to access them and influence them over time. Final thing that I want to talk about is how we prepare foods. How it is that we actually then make food at the end of the day. And it'll surprise you to know that 85 to 90% of meals in Australia are actually eaten at home. We have this tendency to think that people eat out a lot, but 85 to 90% of meals are eaten at home. They're made at home, eaten at home. And younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, are cooking more, not less. We sort of think that young people are useless, right? But actually, they're cooking a lot more because it gives them control over what they eat and how it is prepared. So we have this increasing tendency to make our food at home, to not buy our food out, to take back the control of the food that we're eating, especially as we're going to younger populations. But that doesn't mean that I'm willing to put in all of the work, right? So we see the rise of easy-to-assemble food, yeah? Pre-packaged, pre-cut, pre-marinated. Anybody who's used something like HelloFresh or Marley Spoon, a curated food service, where they'll just send you a recipe and send you the ingredients, and you just cut it up and do it, and you feel like you cooked, right? Because you put some stuff in a pan. But actually, a lot of the work was done for you. You didn't have to go out and do a lot of the work. So we see this rise of easy-to-assemble food, and younger people actually eating less junk food and less of the old-school microwave meals that I certainly remember from being a kid, to being things that you prepare yourself, meals that you prepare yourself that are fresh is the big move at the moment. Control, but control with ease. So I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it too much. And that's just where we are currently. This is the future. People giggle when I show this photo. But that exists. This thing is real right now. This is a robot that'll cook you 2,000 meals. You just put the stuff there and say, cook me spaghetti bolognese, and it'll cook you spaghetti bolognese. And that sounds like an amazing thing. So not only do I not have to buy any of my own food, I can actually have something that does it all for me without having to employ someone to do that. I never have to do it. I know that it's done, and I know the control's there, but actually it just does it. Yeah? So this exists right now. My prediction is that this technology will very quickly be overrun by the next one, which is food printers. So it's all fine and well to have a manual system that does that, but it relies on you thinking about cooking in the way that we currently conceptualize cooking. This is an actual product as well, which is a food printer. And the future is that actually you'll just put freeze-dried cartridges of food into a machine. It'll lay down pixels of food, cook it with a laser, and there you'll have food. That's the future of how we're going to eat. And if we go back to our Internet of Things, my cell phone that I've been peeing on religiously for the last week, so it can tell me all my health markers, is going to tell that thing actually what sort of medication I should be getting. So I don't have to worry, right? The government will just add into my food simvastatins if my cholesterol's too high, my blood pressure medication, and a diuretic to get my water down. And it'll do that all the time. These food printers will essentially compensate for all of the information that is collected in your cell phone or your implant eventually about you and how you're eating and what you're eating. Yeah. And that means that your food becomes increasingly individualized. Partly through you making certain choices at the very beginning, but mostly through an automated system that takes care of all of that for you. So what I end up eating is substantially different from what you end up eating because the technology behind that is actually changing the way that both of us eat. Yeah? Prints it for us, orders it for us, no friction, no effort. Individualized food, completely bespoke to me and who I am and what I want. So what you have is a fundamental change in the system and in the way that people operate within a food space. So this is right now. What happens? I'm influenced by social media, websites, friends, maybe a curated service like HelloFresh. I decide what I want to eat. I go to a supermarket, local store, maybe online, maybe a curated service, and I shop. And maybe I get diverted. So I go in going, I'm going to have sirloin steak today, but I end up buying chicken thighs because they're half price, right? I get diverted away from what I want to buy. I then go home, I cook in a traditional way, maybe experimental, probably guided by my mobile phone, which is telling me how to cook because I'm a young person and I don't know. I take a picture of it, I put it on Instagram, and I eat, right? Why do I put it on Instagram? We all do this. It's a weird thing that we do because we like to share food, and food is this communal thing. We love to share it with this virtual group of imaginary 3,000 followers that we have on Instagram. That's where we are now. But the future is actually going to look subtly different to that. I'm going to decide how I want to eat. What matters to me? Does it matter that it is paleo, grass-fed, free range, or does it matter that it is cheap as possible? The automated processes will buy for me, and I'm unlikely to be diverted. So if you don't get me right at the beginning, that is exceptionally difficult to change because the system will just continue to buy what it thinks you should have. Unlikely to be diverted. I then go, I cook in a guided or completely automated way, right? In the case of food printers and food robots, I take a picture, I put it on Instagram, and I eat, right? So what changes is the beginning pieces, where consumers are actually amenable to us telling them something about what we make and why they should eat us. And you only really have two choices. You either have to be part of that decision, you have to have people going, I would like to eat beef, or you have to be a part of the algorithm that tells the machines what to buy. And that's a fundamentally different way of thinking about reaching consumers, is to get to health bodies and governments before this technology gets to that stage where you just get cut out of the loop. Yeah? So I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts. What do we do today? So the one is wholeheartedly, every day, embrace new technology in everything. Because if it's going to change the way that consumers work, think, and eat, it's going to change everything about our business. So embrace it, find out what's happening, and you can look at all of this stuff. It sounds crazy, and people think I'm some sort of nutter when I talk about this, but this stuff's all happening now, right? Find out about it and start thinking about, actually, how do we influence those bodies to make sure that we don't get cut out of this automated system, this loop that can exclude whomever it likes on the basis of whatever arbitrary rules are set at that level. Position against new and existing competitors. Beef has inherent advantages against every single major protein available today. Its goodness factors, its health credentials are generally higher than things like chicken. The taste credentials are there. You have a lot of quality. You've got that Australian made coming through really, really strongly. We have these advantages, and we can leverage those advantages. And I'm talking here about beef at the meta scale, but this is true of everybody as well. So some of my favorite quotes from this morning's session were, what about consumers? And don't forget about the brand. If you're producing something, you are a brand. You've got to think about how that is positioned, and we need to think about the brand that we all manage together, as well as your individual brands. And think about how you position against everything. And then how do you position against synthetic protein? What about crickets? What about algae? What about plant-based proteins like tofu? As terrible as that is. And we need to be positioning for that now, because if we leave it, people will make up their own decisions, and the internet will tell them what that position is. And finally, consider the changing reality. Determine how you will communicate with consumers in new and innovative ways, because the world of going out and putting a TV ad on and expecting that to do everything, while it's fine now and actually still works really well, that is not the future we're heading towards. And if we don't change it now, and we don't start thinking now about how we're going to get to people in this smartphone-centric world, actually we'll get left behind because somebody else will. And that's probably the biggest thing that I think you can take from today. And that's me, actually. Thank you very much.